foreign accent with this on. So, the first time I came with then Secretary Espy to Mississippi, soon after he became Secretary of Agriculture, and he spoke to the state legislature in Jackson. And we passed by a very low-income neighborhood in Jackson with really dilapidated housing. And I said, oh, this is as bad, as anything in my hometown of poverty. He said, well, I love where I represent amazing people, but you've not seen nothing until you've seen the Delta, right? And so this was, 1993, and I've worked on projects here since then, and it's been this dual situation I felt ever since, that you guys have given this incredible gift to the world of culture. Right? And my first shock here when I met young people in 1993, I was going on and on about blues. Aren't you so glad to be from here? And they're like, what are you talking about? We listen to R&B. That's old fogey music. No one listens to that anymore. So I got an education on that. But if you go to blues museums, you see the people signing from Germany and from England and Australia. The whole world is coming here because of this incredible gift you've given to the world. Blues, which, as you know, I don't have to tell you, the basis of jazz and R&B and rock and roll, all came from this little patch of land. So I always feel like I'm going back to Vienna in the time of Bach to come here, the equivalent of modern music. At the same time, as you know, this area has been long neglected by the federal government, by the state government, a lot of inequality of wealth. I don't have to tell you, it's tied here and everywhere else to racial inequity as well, and a long sad history that we're all as a nation working to overcome. And so when I could in the federal government, and I certainly knew Secretary Espy and President Clinton wanted to do it, devoted as much resources, and I worked with Lee there, Lee Powell at USDA. We did as much as we could for the Delta, lots of poor rural areas around the country. And ever since I've had this job, particularly in the last 10 years when we did have a national program, the first thing I said is what we can do for the Delta. So I'm on a national tour. I'm driving myself, probably going to be closer to 9,000 or 10,000 miles when I'm done with all the backtracking. I originally said 20 to 22 states. I have to recalculate. I think it's going to be something like 25 or 28 or something like that. This is, I think, my 16th state, this Mississippi, right? I started this morning. I visited a food bank in Birmingham. Earlier, I went to, and I also went to the Civil Rights Museum in Birmingham, which was very moving. And before that, I went to an event at Troy University in Troy, Alabama. We have a large AmeriCorps Vista program there as well. And you're seeing them do all this really incredible work, and to be in the hometown of John Lewis was just such an honor for me. And I honor all the people who fought so hard here, Fannie Lou Hamer and all the great heroes who really gave their lives to make all of us a little freer. And so it's just great to see our vistas in action, doing the work in the field. I can be in my office in New York and have lots of telephone calls, read lots of reports, have lots of Zoom meetings, but seeing it in person and hearing all the great things Mega's doing and how our vistas can help them is just so impactful. And just say a few things I've learned from my trip. Number one is this country is not as different than people think. This country is not as different as people think. And even before this trip, I've been to all 50 states, multiple times. The people in rural poverty in Maine have a lot of similarities to people in rural poverty in Mississippi. There's a lot of seasonal jobs that aren't there year long, which is a problem here and there. Even here, where prices are lower than New York, there's still very low. Prices are high compared to wages. And so everywhere in the country, hunger is not a food issue; it's an affordability issue. Especially places like this. Oh my goodness, we're one of the most agriculturally productive spots on the planet. I know to Lee, in the decades I've been coming here, seeing the move from cotton to corn is really interesting, partially because of ethanol, partially because of corn syrup, and partially because of subsidies. But this was one of the most agriculturally productive slices of lands on the entire planet. And yet people are going hungry. So it's not because of lack of food. It's because people don't earn enough to meet their basic expenses. I was just, just a few weeks ago now, an event in New Jersey, and the minimum wage is a little higher there than here, but it's $12 an hour. That equals about $25,000 a year for full-time work. $25,000 a year for full-time full-time work. And the median housing price there equals, just for a rental of a 2-bedroom apartment, is about $21,000 per year. And here, what's the minimum wage here? Is it $7.25 or lower? $7.25. So that's maybe $18,000 a year for full-time work. What would a 2-bedroom apartment or a house rent here for? Maybe a little cheaper. So you know, let's say $10,000 for a year. So everyone wants to overcomplicate this and overthink this and say we don't know what causes this, we don't solve this. If you're making $18,000 a year in full-time work and you're paying $10,000 a year in rent, this is no shock. Why you don't have money left over for child care costs, health care, prescription drugs, gas isn't free. You don't have much public transportation here, so you're either driving or a long walk. And so that's the challenge of hunger in America. And the inner city problems are if you call Clarksdale an inner city here in relative terms, it would be similar to things I've seen in the Bronx or the south side of Chicago or south side of LA. So I know sometimes people can feel a little isolated from other parts of the country, and in New York think everything's all different there. But we know the problems are similar, and we know that public policy matters. Before the pandemic, the federal safety net programs of SNAP, what used to be called the Food Stamps Program, WIC, for pregnant women and children under 5, school lunch, school breakfast, which served nearly 30 million kids a day. The home-delivered meals, a lot of people don't even know Meals on Wheels is often funded by the federal government. They don't know that senior meals programs are often funded by the federal government. Before the pandemic, those programs were 15 times the dollar amount of food distributed by every charity in America. 15 times the dollar amount of food distributed by every charity in America. And I know there are a lot of stereotypes. People aren't working, etc. The vast majority of people getting SNAP are working. They're working hard, playing by the rules, and they just don't earn enough to feed their family. And I must say, and I say this in New York, I'll say this here, there's a double standard. That you can get millions of dollars in agricultural subsidies, and some of it goes to food, but there still is some cotton production here, and people don't eat cotton, so it's not even supporting the food supply. No one blinks twice about a rich landowner getting millions of dollars from the federal government, but the SNAP benefits, which before the pandemic were $1.30 per meal, people go nuts over. And so if we did a better job of raising wages and ensuring an adequate safety net, then groups like Berg, you could do a better job of filling in the gaps. If you just weren't dealing with this tidal wave of need, if you could fine-tune it more, if we got those other programs working better. So that's one of the things I'm really highlighting, as well as the pandemic EBT program, which was created by Congress to give money to families whose kids are in schools that are closed. And the last thing I want to say is, there's a lot of bad things going on. Before the pandemic, there were 36 million Americans living in places that couldn't afford enough food. And so you don't think I'm picking on the Delta or picking on Mississippi. My hometown of New York City, before the pandemic, there were 1 million people in New York City alone who couldn't afford enough food. We have a few dozen billionaires and 1 million people who couldn't afford enough food. So there's something structurally wrong with this country. There's a lot right with them, our freedom and freedom of speech, so I can say this, our freedom of religion, our freedom to worship, but there's something wrong when we're the only industrialized Western nation on the planet which this level of hunger. We almost ended hunger in America in the 1970s because we had bipartisan support for these programs. People like Robert Dole, right-wing, senator from Kansas, teamed up with George McGovern, liberal Democrat from South Dakota, and great leaders like the late great Thad Cochran here from Mississippi, who really stood up for a bipartisan effort to deal with something as this. And as our political system has become more and more broken, we've had more and more difficulties dealing with this problem. But we want to end with the good news. We almost ended hunger in the 1970s because we worked together to have policies that made work pay, that ensured there was a safety net for people when there wasn't enough pay for the work. And we can do that again. We can work with the nonprofits, we can work with the state, we can work with foundations, we can work with other advocacy groups to make it a reality to end hunger in America. You know, 100 years ago we had child labor throughout America, and it was legal. And people assumed, well, it's always been here, it always will be, there's nothing we can do about it, that's just life. Kids have to work if they're poor. And there's still some child labor at the edges of American society, mostly in, frankly, agriculture, but by and large it's illegal, and by and large kids are in school instead of doing agriculture. And in New York it wasn't agriculture, they were working in sweatshops, you know, 8, 10, or if you know the term breaker boys. There were little boys 8, 9, 10 years old sent into the front of anthracite coal mines to break up the coal by hand, because they had nimble little fingers. They'd lose arms, they'd lose legs, they'd die of black lung disease in their teens. And my point is, we thought, that's just how it is. And too many Americans say today, oh well, tens of millions of Americans in a country with 500 billionaires going hungry, that's just how it is. That's just what we have to accept. It's not how it is, it's not what we have to accept. Much of the rest of the world's gotten rid of it. Many of our, we almost got rid of it here, and working together we can get rid of it in America with great leadership from you guys here. And so it's just such an honor to be here. I want to hear a little more about the great work our Vistas are doing. That's what's also, you know, why do we have a Vista program? A, because they do vital work for the communities and get things done. Hopefully you'll learn some job skills, whether you become a banker or a lawyer, and then you think about this time in your program later, or you go into the nonprofit sector. These skills will be vital for life. But I also do it to increase my, my enthusiasm and bring up my morale. I've been doing this, marking my 20th year with the organization with this national trip. And every year we get a new infusion of Vistas. Your greatest strength is also your greatest weakness. You don't know what doesn't work. And so you're always asking, can we try it this way? Can we try it that way? Can we try it this way? I'm sure they do the same, you know, for you. And having this infusion of enthusiasm and building a new generation of leaders who can take us across the finish line, finally end hunger in America. I'm so honored to be in your presence. So I'm sorry I'm speaking so slowly. I'm from New York. I usually speak quickly, because I've been in the South 10 days now. I've really slowed down. So usually I speak quickly. So I'm sorry if I'm too slow today. Thank you.
First of all, I want to say thanks, and let's get through another round. For the work that he does, and that he's not just in New York, which he could have just stayed in New York, but he's spreaded his knowledge and his capabilities all around the U.S. And to venture around the U.S. in a 9,000-mile trip, you know, I'm normally one that can get in my car and just go. But you got me beat, George. I would do it. Not 9,000 miles across.
Let's say it'd be easier at home, but you have much better barbecue here too. You can't have proper barbecue in New York because of the laws of you really regulate the smokers, and you know, true barbecue's got to be smoked by a few days. Now, you know, if you come to New York, I'll show you a real New York bagel. It's not